that. The important thing, they weren't allowed back. And that is the most important thing. They became refugees and they couldn't go back to their homes. Some Palestinians that moved from West Jerusalem to the east, they got the homes of Jews who left East Jerusalem to go to West Jerusalem, and they got the homes of the Palestinians that lost their homes. In some way, we can say that there was a home swap, but by the end of the 1948 war, this is the map of Jerusalem, and there is a division line in the middle. And this story continues up until 1967, when Jerusalem was connected once again. Together, we can see that the western part of Jerusalem and the eastern part of Jerusalem were united. This is a result of the 1967 Six-Day War. Israel took over the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, Golan Heights, Sinai Peninsula, but the important part for us is that Israel ripped a part of the West Bank and created what is a greater East Jerusalem. So Israel took the Jordanian city of Jerusalem, we can see it was a pretty small city, and turned it into this pretty big town that was connected to Jerusalem. And from that moment, we know that the Israeli law abide in all parts of Jerusalem. This is a critical point, as in the West Bank, up until today, the only law that makes a difference would be the Israeli military law. But that is not the case in Jerusalem, both West and East, as the Israeli law abides there, same way if we were in Tel Aviv or any other city in the country. There's one Israeli law. From that point, Israel had to decide what to do with the Palestinians, and decided back in 1967 not to grant Israeli citizenship to the Palestinians living in East Jerusalem. There were about 70,000 people at the time, but to offer them only a residency, which means that the Palestinians in Jerusalem, up until today, although they have a way to get a citizenship, very few did manage to do that, and the majority are residents of Israel. That means that they cannot vote in the Israeli election, they cannot vote for the Israeli Knesset, for the parliament, and also that they are temporary residents in Jerusalem. They have to prove that they live in Jerusalem year after year. If they don't do that, if they fail to do that, they can lose their residency. So two different populations live in the city of Jerusalem. They live under one law, but they don't have the same rights. Let's start with that. Having said that, once Israel annexes Jerusalem, it decides that it wants to build Jewish neighborhoods in those areas. Whatever you see in blue in this map are pretty major Jewish neighborhoods to be built in East Jerusalem. Nowadays, we're talking about 350,000 Palestinians in East Jerusalem, but we're also talking about 220,000 Israeli Jews who live in major Jewish neighborhoods such as Ramot, here in the north part of the map, or Gilo. But to do so, Israel needed to take the land, to expropriate the land or to seize the land from Palestinians. Much of this land was privately owned by Palestinians, so Israel seized the land, or about a third of the land of East Jerusalem was seized or expropriated by Israel back in 1967 in order to build those neighborhoods. From 1967 up until today, Israel did not build any Palestinian neighborhood, and also makes it very difficult for the Palestinians who are in the orange or kind of yellow parts of this map to build and continue building in their neighborhoods. This is what we saw so far. But what we're seeing right now in the current events is something that is even more dramatic. So I zoomed in a little bit so we can see the old city and the holy basin of Jerusalem. Here is Sheikh Jarrah in the north, here is Silwan in the south. Now, what Israel is doing in the last couple of years, we can say, is unprecedented. It is the first time that not only settlers or Israeli Jews will enter areas that were controlled or owned by Palestinians, but this will be the first time the Palestinians will be actually evicted from their houses since Israel took over in 1967. And there's a question of who does it, why are they doing it, and what is the point behind it. We need to understand that when we're looking at the map of Jerusalem, we're talking about strategic locations. We're talking about maybe a future share of the city between Israel and Palestine, if that would happen. If a future division of the city would happen, most of the blue Israeli neighborhoods will be a part of the Israeli country or state, and assuming that most of the orange neighborhood will be a part of the Palestinian state. What will happen to the area of the old city and to the Holy Basin? We can see that the majority of the people living here are Palestinians. We have roughly in the Holy Basin of Jerusalem about 100,000 Palestinians and about 3,000 Jews. What will be the future of the area? The Israeli government wants to have control of it, but doesn't want to make a unilateral move here. Maybe it's afraid of international pressure, or maybe of a majority in the government. How exactly could that be done? It's not sure. So the people who are doing it in a way, in the sake of the Israeli government, are private associations, right-wing associations, Jewish settler associations that are taking over the land of the Holy Basin and are trying to make it as Jewish as possible. How exactly is that done? This is what we'll try to explain today. But we need to understand that although those associations are private, they're not a part of the Israeli government, in some ways they work together. And if it wouldn't be for the Israeli government and to their treatment of those associations, if it wouldn't be to two specific Israeli laws that were made in Israel back in 1950 and back in 1970, it would be impossible for those associations to work and to take the homes where Palestinian families live and to evict those families. We need to understand the connection between the Israeli government and between those associations, and this is what we'll try to do today. When we're talking about Sheikh Jarrah specifically, we need to remember that the neighborhood has two stories and two names. On the left part, you can see what is the Muslim part, or the Muslim story of Sheikh Jarrah. It's a neighborhood that was established about 150 years ago. It's named after the Dr. Salah ad-Din, that lived here about 800 years ago, and obviously we know that story. But the Jews have a story for Sheikh Jarrah as well, and what you're seeing here to the right is the tomb of an important Jewish priest. His name was Shimon HaTzadik, which is Simon the Righteous, was of the people of the Great Knesset about 2,000 years ago, and according to the Jewish tradition, he is buried in Sheikh Jarrah as well. Which means that about 120 years ago, 130 years ago, a group of Jews decided they want to settle in Sheikh Jarrah as well. They came in, they bought the land. In some parts of the neighborhood, they actually managed to build homes. In other parts of the neighborhood, they didn't do that. But we know that in 1948, this whole idea of Jews and Palestinians living in different parts of Sheikh Jarrah, Shimon HaTzadik, together in a way, ended. The Jews have left Sheikh Jarrah, and Palestinians left other areas in the city, and they came to Sheikh Jarrah. Now, by the end of the 1948 war, we needed to, or both sides needed to do something with the amount of refugees or people that lost their homes that came into the neighborhood. The Jews who were made to leave Sheikh Jarrah, they got a compensation by the Israeli government. Remember that about 35,000 Palestinians are living their homes in West Jerusalem, which means that there are empty homes, there are vacant homes in West Jerusalem, and this is what the Israeli Jews are getting as a compensation. One of them, Ben Yair family, their son Michael became the legal advisor of the Knesset under the Rabin administration. They stated that they had two homes and one shop in Sheikh Jarrah, and they got a compensation for that in West Jerusalem. In a way, a similar process happened for the Palestinian families that lost their homes, not only in West Jerusalem, it happened also in Jaffa, in Haifa, in other areas in what was mandatory Israel or Palestine. They came to Sheikh Jarrah and they decided to look for new homes there. Now, the Jordanian government back in 1956 had an agreement with the families, the Palestinian families, some refugee families, and also with UNRWA, an organization that was formed by the UN for the sake of Palestinian refugees. And they decided to build 28 homes in the southern area or eastern southern area of Sheikh Jarrah for those families. This is what you can see here on the right. You can see the agreement between UNRWA, between the organization, between the Jordanian government to build those 28 homes. Up until today, when we're mentioning the story of Sheikh Jarrah, this is the story. We're talking about 28 families and what will be the future of them. But the establishment of this specific part of the neighborhood as a place for the refugees family was formed in 1956. Okay. What's happening right now is a big change. what we're seeing in the neighborhood. What we're looking at is the Palestinian families that some of them, of course, are in danger of eviction. And we need to ask ourselves, how did we reach that point? How exactly did it happen? How could it that people are evicted from the neighborhood? And to understand it, we need to understand two specific laws that were established in Israel back many years ago. The first law is talking about the property of the absentee. It means that whichever Palestinian left their home, was evicted of their home, ran away, it doesn't matter. They weren't allowed to go back into their home. By the end of the 1948 war, they lost their home. The home became the property of the country. It was assigned to the custodian of absentee property, and the custodian decided what to do with that property. Gave it away to Jewish families at the time. Many Jews, remember, by the end of 1949, 1950, are coming both from Eastern Europe, from the Middle East, from North Africa, and they are the ones to receive the homes of the Palestinian families. After 1967, and after Israel annexes East Jerusalem, like I explained before, Israel decides to legislate one more law. That law is a much more tricky one, because the law of 1970 of administrative order is talking about how Jews can go back into the homes or to the homes and property that they left behind before 1948. And that is pretty much the story of what we're talking about in Sheikh Jarrah right now. Remember, the Jews were the owners of both the homes themselves or the plots, the areas that were there, the property, and now they have a way to go back. If the descendants of those people will go back into their homes, I believe maybe we would look at the story a little bit different. But at no place in Jerusalem, we saw the original descendants of the Jews from 1948 that will go back into their homes. And this is where the story gets a little bit complicated, because many people in Israel mistake to see the story of Sheikh Jarrah as a story of real estate. And they say, we need to follow the Israeli laws, we need to follow the Israeli courts. If they talk about how one home belongs to a person, that then person should have it, but they fail to understand, I think, something that is much, much bigger. The associations, and three specific associations are the ones that are involved in the whole area of the Holy Basin of Jerusalem. We have El-Ad from the south in the area of Silwan. We have Ateret Kohanim, an Israeli Jewish organization also in the area of Patan El-Hawa in Silwan. And here specifically in Sheikh Jarrah, we're talking about another organization called Nachalat Shimon International. Now, the owners of the area in Sheikh Jarrah, the Jewish owners, they decided to sell their rights in the neighborhood about 20 years ago to that association, to Nachalat Shimon International, which is an association we don't know much about. We know that they're based in Delaware, in the States. Perhaps they're based there because it is have an association listed there without giving much information about who are the people operating the association. But to make a long story short, we see that the people that are now entering the homes of Sheikh Jarrah are not even connected to the ones before 1948. And we need to ask ourselves also a greater question. How could it be that there is an Israeli law that gives the opportunity to go back to property that was left behind before 1948, and it works in a one-sided way? That is the major or key question to ask about Sheikh Jarrah. Because if we open up the cases before 1948, we need to remember that yes, 2,000 Jews have lost their homes in East Jerusalem, but 35,000 Palestinians have lost their homes in the same way. And since the annexation of Jerusalem happened in 1967, and the law should treat and look at everybody in the same way, those Palestinian families, if they are evicted from their homes, should have a right and an option to go back into the homes that they have left behind. But that is not optional for those families. It's their homes, Palestinian property that was left before 1948 was already expropriated or seized by the Israeli government based on the absentee property law from 1950. And what we have is finally a result of a Jewish family that was compensated for what they left behind once, but now in a way they have a way to come back into their property, which means that out of the home they left behind, they will get two homes. The Palestinians lost the original home in 1948, and now they would lose the second home, which means they will be left with 0 homes. And obviously, this story becomes famous, well-known, international, because of the unique angle, maybe, that it gives us on the relations between Palestinians and Israelis in this region. There is a lot to know and understand if we want to perceive the Palestinian narrative and the Israeli narrative, but the isolated story of Sheikh Jarrah specifically tells us a story where one side takes it all and doesn't allow the other side to be allowed to any property. Let's talk about the map itself and the area that we can see where the homes are about to be evicted. We need to understand that the Israeli court has been dealing with the story for many years. We're talking about a couple of decades, and the Israeli court is trying hard not to decide, to be honest. They're trying to make an effort not to make a final decision on how would that work, but we do see a progress in the claims of the settlers. We do see a progress in the loss of the Palestinian families in their appeals to the Israeli courts. And we do know that in May last month, the Israeli courts have decided that the Palestinian families will be evicted. The question is when. Right now, we're talking about 13 families, 13 Palestinian families that are living in Sheikh Jarrah. We're talking about extended families, really big families. So overall, we're talking about 300 Palestinians to be evicted from their families. When the major area that would happen, we can see it here in red. We can see an eviction suit. And we also know that 4 Palestinian families were already evicted from this area back in 2009. So they, of course, will be added. And what we're also seeing is that slowly, the area of Sheikh Jarrah, Shimon HaTzadik neighborhood, is turning from a Palestinian neighborhood into a Jewish neighborhood. And the plan of the association of Shimon HaTzadik International is to evict the Palestinians and to build here 200 units that will be a neighborhood where Jewish Israelis would live. Obviously, that will be kind of a stronghold of Jewish Israeli neighborhood in the northern part of the old city of Jerusalem. That would change the Holy Basin completely. If we're talking about the future split of the city, if that would happen, obviously we would also look at that in a different way. And we need to remember that the settler organizations are very much connected to the Israeli government, which means that if riots occur in the neighborhood, then Israel will send private security for the settlers. Actually, they don't need to wait for riots to occur. They will already assign that security. We're talking about security that costs the Israeli taxpayers over 100 million shekels yearly, which means that every settler from the chain of Sheikh Jarrah, Silwan, and the area of Mount of Olives is secured at the rate of about 3,000 shekels per month. It's roughly $1,000 from the money of the Israeli taxpayers. And obviously, we see a statement from the Israeli government that it's not that they are not only looking aside at the story, they're making sure that the settlers will get what they want, when the only group that can really stop the eviction is the Israeli government if they choose to, and we'll talk about that as well. So what was done here throughout the 13 years that Sheikh Jarrah has been in danger of eviction? We saw major demonstrations. Those demonstrations were started obviously by Palestinian families. We need to remember that Palestinian families that were evicted from the neighborhood, they get no compensation whatsoever. That's a question that usually comes up. What is the compensation, or what do they get? And the answer is nothing. There is no compensation for for the Palestinian families. They are not, by the Israeli Supreme Court, they are not perceived as the owners of those homes. They're perceived in a way as intruders, or at least as protective tenants, which means they have a right to live in the neighborhood, but they don't have the right to make changes. They need to pay a monthly rent or fee to the owners, or who the Supreme Court see as the owners of the neighborhood, which means if they fail to pay, if they made a change in the apartments, which they were not supposed to, they broke a wall, they fixed a window, whatever it could be, they could be evicted from their homes. And as I mentioned, 4 Palestinian families were evicted so far from that part of the neighborhood. Now, the demonstrations back in 2009 sparked a movement, we can say, that had Palestinians joined by Israeli Jews who saw solidarity, with standing by their fellow Palestinians who said, we don't want those things to be done in our names. It couldn't be that the Israeli law would work in such a way between Israelis and Palestinians, and need to step up and stand with the Palestinians. Those demonstrations made a big international change. We saw many visitors, internationals that are coming in and stepping in into the story of Sheikh Jarrah. One of the peaks in those demonstrations was the president or the former president Carter that joined one of those demonstrations. We know that when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, she mentioned the story of Sheikh Jarrah when she talked to the Israeli government. And we also know that during the Obama time, so between 2009 to 2017, during the Obama campaign or years, we know that there were no evictions. So we can say that at least on one note, there is some, you can say, temporary success to those demonstrations and to the fact that Jews and Palestinians, Palestinians and Jews are standing together in non-violence and standing against those evictions, calling to have a better future for the city of Jerusalem. This obviously is what we stand for in Competence for Peace. We joined those demonstrations as well as they, let's say, shifted back a couple of months ago. Obviously, there are big and other organizations that are there, such as Peace Now, Standing Together, Free Jerusalem, and many others. We're a part of that coalition, we can say, and we will keep coming every Friday to stand with the Palestinians of the neighborhood. I'm going back to the image that started this presentation, right? Remember that the protests in Sheikh Jarrah, in a way, they didn't stop, right? From 2009, every Friday at 4 p.m., there is a demonstration there of Jews and Palestinians standing together. And there's a question of how did this story kind of rise again? And I have to say, it could be a coincidence, or it could be kind of a greater power that brought those things together. We need to remember that the political reality in Israel is changing. We are about to see, I hope that it will happen, but we're about to see a change in the regime in Israel. It's Sunday in the afternoon or evening time. We're about to change the government. It will be the first time that happened in 12 years, consecutive years of the Netanyahu rule. And many people in Israel believe that the fact that the regime is about to change, the fact that someone managed to build a coalition to overthrow Netanyahu, is one of the reasons why the right wing in Israel decided that they want to turn Sheikh Jarrah, Al-Aqsa Mosque in the old city of Jerusalem and other areas in the country into more of a war zone. Those things are not coincidental, and we need to remember that. When the demonstrations of Sheikh Jarrah took part in the last year or two, they were very quiet. We didn't see a huge turnout, but still, the police didn't interfere for many years. And all of a sudden, in the beginning of April, about 2 months ago, we see a non-violent demonstration when the person that was beaten by the police is a member of the Israeli Knesset. No person should be beaten by the Israeli police in a non-violent demonstration, for sure not an Israeli parliament member who has immunity, right? Nobody should or is allowed to touch him. But that sparked kind of a wave in those demonstrations when we just started to see more people coming in. The next one, we already saw another 200, 300 people joining the demonstrations, and the police just decided to retaliate. And every week, what we see is a non-violent peace demonstration in Sheikh Jarrah that is ended by the police interfering. Sometimes they shoot kind of tipped bullets. Sometimes we have sponge grenades. All of those things are happening in Sheikh Jarrah. And we need to ask ourselves also if this is coming from above or not. Okay, I want to start the presentation. First of all, see if Salah joined us. Okay, perfect. So Ben, if we can also spotlight Salah. Yeah. So we can see him. Maybe remove the spotlight for me. Okay, Salah. Good evening, Masal Khair. Hi. Okay, so Salah will unmute himself. Let's see. Okay. Almost perfect. Salah, you need to unmute yourself again. Not there yet. Let's see. Okay.
Good evening. How are you?
Good evening, Salah. What's up?
Sorry, I was outside. I was fighting with a soldier outside.
Okay.
Now.
Okay. Salah, do you have time to talk to us? Are you okay?
Yes. Now I am okay.
Okay. So good evening, and thank you for joining us. And if we can start, maybe tell us about what is life in Sheikh Jarrah, what is life in the neighborhood during the last couple of months.
Good evening for everybody. What happened? What going in Sheikh Jarrah now is big jail. Nobody can go out or coming inside like Shuhada Street in Khalil al-Rahman, Hebron. Now, exactly, I speak with you. For 2 minutes, I was fighting with the soldier, with the settlers, because that what happened. Now, every day, the soldier with the settlers, they coming and dancing in the street with the soldier not speaking no with the settlers. But if Arab people they make anything, they quick they took him outside my neighborhood. Now everyone and everybody they thinking about the Israel occupation. They want to move everyone, all the families, 28 families. It's my where I live, and another 42 families in another side for Sheikh Jarrah. So you have apartheid for the Arab people in Jerusalem.
Salah, first of all, if we have any questions for Salah, please send them in the chat, and we will also ask Salah. But Salah, can you talk about the relations with the settlers themselves, the one that already moved into the neighborhood? How exactly does it exist? You're living house by house. It's one settler family, one Palestinian family. How is it? How does it look?
No. You have 3 families for the settlers, and all the families is Arab. But what going exactly? The settlers they move him with the machine gun every time. The police with this behind the settlers. Nobody can talking. Nobody can make anything with the Arab people. But the soldier with the settlers they make what they want, and nobody can talking.
Okay. Salah, I want to ask you please about the demonstrations that are happening in Sheikh Jarrah. Can you please describe to us from your point of view and perspective about the demonstrations, their efficiency? Do you think that they can make a change? What do you think about the connections of the activists that are coming into the neighborhood?
It's a good question. When after 2009, when they took the settlers three houses in my neighborhood, Ghawi family and Hannoun family and Kul family, I beginning in 2009 demonstration every Friday. All these years with the Qadar, with my friend, the Israeli friend, and I think because that now the name of Sheikh Jarrah, all the world they know about Sheikh Jarrah. It's very good to make demonstration for the in my neighborhood or in Silwan, or because I think what I think and what I see the Israel court. I don't believe in the Israel court, but I believe in the demonstration in the street more and more and more. They push about what going exactly in my neighborhood.
Okay. I want to ask you about what do you think about the future in the neighborhood? Because we know that when the Israeli settlers are organized, when the army and the police obviously are on their side, and when the government is in that story, we know that usually the end of the story is that the settlers do move in and the Palestinians get evicted. So do you think that there will be a change in Sheikh Jarrah? Do you think that in a couple of years the demonstrations and international pressure can stop the evictions? Do you have optimism about the story of the neighborhood?
Look, now the future for the future now, I this good question. Everyone they ask me about this question, but what I think now my neighborhood now the Sheikh Jarrah it's not in Palestine now, because all the world is speaking now about Jarrah and about the occupation, about Silwan. Now I think after what happened before 3 weeks in Gaza and what happened, I think now Jordanian and Egypt and Qatar and France and America, they stop the fire, and I think now the court, Israel court, they afraid now to give any houses to live in Shajarrah.
So you think you have hope that the courts will in the end decide not to make the evictions?
Look,
This thought.
if the Israel occupation, the court, they took example to give any house to live in Shajarrah, I think they're beginning another thing with Gaza.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think another thing, what going here now exactly in Israel, the government in Israel now, it's Mr. Netanyahu and Ben Gvir, they don't give to be quiet now, because that when Ben Gvir he came to my neighborhood, I working about the stupid like Ben Gvir and like who going to Bab al Amud or the Aqsa Mosque, because that I working about this. They give us they make for us good job. I give to all the world to show what the soldier with the settlers they make my neighborhood. They stealing, they killing, and nobody tell him nothing, because that now all the technology today it's with us, because that all the world they know about the occupation now.
Okay. Well, we were joined by about 120 participants. When I would assume that the majority of them are not in Israel, they are in Europe, they are in America. They're listening to you. They will speak to people around them. What would you like to tell them? What can they do in order to stop the evictions and to stand with the right side in Jarrah?
I want to tell him to continue with the demonstration on all the world. This is good for us. They push about your government in all the world, to push about Israel government to don't give me to leave my home or my neighborhood.
Okay. Okay, we have some questions that are coming in from the chat. So we'll start answering them. One of them is about the electricity in your area. Is there because there was a cut off and then came back? Okay, what happened there?
Look, I saw in America I saw 1 million in America. I see in the British, I see in France, I see in Sweden, I see in German. I was for 4 days, I was in Tel Aviv. I make good big demonstration. It's good for us to all the world to hear us about the occupation. They give me to continue to working about what going here.
All right, we have a question for you, Salah, from the audience. The question is, we hear that the police blocked the main street leading to the Palestinian families' homes, but the arrests are still happening. So who is arrested exactly if no activist can be in the neighborhood? It's only the Palestinian families.
Exactly, this could be another good question. Just the small boys, they come into my neighborhood, they playing, and they catch these boys and they give them to go out. The police, it's good. They make good job for us. When they catch these boys or these girls, I take the picture and I give all the world to see how the difficult about the Arab people with the settlers. The settlers, they going inside without nobody tell them nothing. With the machine gun, they can make what they want and nobody tell them nothing. but the Arab people, they can't do it nothing in my neighborhood.
Exactly. And also we had some pretty crazy arrests in the last couple of days. A journalist from Al Jazeera was arrested by the Israeli police. Then an activist of the Al-Kurd family. She has over 1 million followers on social media. Just after the arrest, I think she had another 200,000 or 300,000. So each time I think the police is deciding to escalate the violence and to make things harder, I think we just see the struggle continue. This in a way feeds it. But we need to also to think if the police really wants to stop it, or are they also using it politically? We have also a question, Salah, about the Israeli government. I'll let you answer, and also I'll say what I think. The question is, do we know what the new government could do? Does it depend upon the national government or the Jerusalem City Hall? So who can stop the eviction from the government, from the court? Who do you expect that will stop it?
The first question, the Israel occupation and the police, because all the friends, they took pictures, good pictures, and they give all the world to know what's going in my neighborhood or in the old city or in the Aqsa Mosque. It's not good for him. If you're speaking, I speak with you, nobody hear us. But the picture, all the world they saw. Now this technology, TikTok and Face and WhatsApp minutes, all the world they know what's going exactly in Jarrah. This is the first question, because that the Jazeera, the girl Juhar al-Bideri, they broke the leg, the hand, and before 4 days, another girls al-Halawani and many friends. And now another law they have, if yourself you took picture, they took your phone. The new law in my neighborhood. Another question, before me, I don't have difficult about sorry to say this, black dog and white dog. For me, all dogs in the government.
Okay. I want to give just an angle on what I think the Israelis themselves can pressure the government to do. And we know that there are places that the government itself can seize an area or expropriate the area. And that already happened in East Jerusalem. Back in 1967, remember we talked about how Israel annexes the area of East Jerusalem and takes a third of the land of East Jerusalem in order to build what is Jewish neighborhoods or Jewish settlements, which means that it's in the power of the government, if they want, if they choose to seize an area, to expropriate an area from someone who owns it. So if the court do decide, and that's what they're deciding, that the settlers, that Nahalat Shimon International would be considered as the owners, the Israeli government has an option to stop them. They can pay Nahalat Shimon if they choose, they cannot pay, but they can do something one-sided in order to stop it. They also have a way not to send the police for the evictions. If it wouldn't be for the police standing with the settlers, obviously the evictions wouldn't happen. So if the government will decide that politically speaking, they need to stop the evictions, they have tools to do that, they have ways to do that. And I think at least it's in the hands of the Israelis, at least to try, at least to make an effort or pressure on the Israeli government to try to stop that. But speaking with the people that we have here, I guess the majority are not Americans, please address your congresspeople, your congressmen, your congresswomen, as write letters to them, make a phone call to them. We know that international pressure make a difference in the story of Sheikh Jarrah. We know that this is one of the reasons why eviction stopped for 8 years in the neighborhood, which means we need help on that as well. And I think Beth wrote in the chat, so Combatants for Peace, we see wrote that we have emailed to your Congress representative and asked them to interfere. There is a link for that. So please do that as well. We have another question. Do we have information about the Ottoman records that dispute the original ownership claims to the Jewish residents of Sheikh Jarrah, which the Israeli courts refused to consider? I have to say that when we're talking about the ownership of the neighborhood, we need to remember one thing. The law of 1970, the administrative order law, mentions that returning your property or claiming back your property is a one-sided law. That means that the family of Salah or other families in Sheikh Jarrah that lost property in Jerusalem, in Jaffa, in Haifa, in Akka, they don't have a way to get it back. And now we need to ask ourselves, do the Jewish settlers, can they show papers? Did the other organizations own the land or not? But I have to say that by the end of the line, by the end of the day, the law works in a one-sided way. And when we go back to ownership, we forget that. Because let's say that the settlers managed to show their claim. Let's say that they managed to show that they bought the land back in 1890. What difference does it make if the law cannot let family of Salah and other families in Sheikh Jarrah to do the same? And how exactly does a country or a democracy work when two people are not treated equally? When the law only helps one side to seize the possession of the other. And I think this is what we need to focus on when we're talking about Sheikh Jarrah. I don't know if I have any more questions. Salah, what else do you want to say?
You're right, my brother. The first thing, if they have any papers about this land, okay, why they don't give the judge this papers? They don't have any papers about this land. This is the first thing. The second thing, the Jordanian, they give us this land and the UNRWA building these houses. Okay. Another thing, if they have papers, okay, give me my home in Jaffa in Yom al-Nakba 1948. Give me back. Okay. And another thing, you think they stopping only just in Sheikh Jarrah after if they took and they building for the city, they stopping in Jerusalem? No, they have big plan about Jerusalem. This beginning, just the beginning in Sheikh Jarrah and they finish in Silwan. You have 345,000 Arab people in Jerusalem. They want to throw all these people outside the block, and out, and they want to bring settlers for Jerusalem. And after that, the Aqsa Mosque. This is the big plan for the settlers and the Israel government. Okay, when they took my home, where I want to go? In the street. I don't have house, another house, and you know exactly what's going in Jerusalem. They don't give anybody to building more, but they want to more and more to stealing and they took the houses because that if you see if in Sheikh Jarrah they stopping in Sheikh Jarrah, okay, this the big problem. Sheikh Jarrah just the beginning. After Sheikh Jarrah you have Wadi Joz. After Wadi Joz, you have another Ras Al Amud, or Jabal Zaytun, or Jabal Mukabbir, and Silwan. This is the big plan for the Israel government.
Exactly like Salah is saying, we need to remember that the story of Sheikh Jarrah is not isolated. So whenever anyone is trying to frame it as if we're talking about a conflict, about real estate, or a struggle about real estate, remember the big plan. Remember the associations and their connection to the Israeli government. Remember that in Sheikh Jarrah, we're talking about 13 families, but in Baten Alawa and Sidwan, we're talking about over 80 families. And if you connect all those dots together, and just like Salah described, then you're seeing what is a change in the population of the Holy Basin in Jerusalem, all backed with help and laws from the Israeli government, private security, police, whatever it needs, to make sure that Palestinians would leave and Jews will come in and take their spot. Salah, I have another question for you. You still have time to be with us?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. So the question is, as residents, how do you cope with the police and the settlers' daily violence? Are you used to it and does it not affect you anymore? Or do you have family members living with trauma and suffering from trauma?
No, my brother, before I beginning the Zoom, I fight with the sitters out and the soldier. They change all my life. They change all my, I afraid in the night. When I sleeping, I afraid to coming to make fire in my home. I afraid about my children when they go to school and they coming back. I don't have life. I don't have life. Exactly. Now I don't have job, another job, because the settlers they go to my boss and they said if you don't give this man to continue to work for you. Nobody can coming to buy from you because that they give me now I don't have job. I stopping now in my job because that what all the life for all the families all change. They're afraid every time they're afraid. Every minute they can coming in your home. They hate you like what happened for me last month. They broke my leg the first day. The second day they broke all this. I broke now, and after 3 days they put me in the jail 5 days. Before 4 days before they take me another time to the police. So every time you're fighting, you don't have life, you don't have nothing because that
What did they say? What did they say that you did? What did they accuse you when they took you last time?
if you continue with the manifestation, if you continue to fighting, I put you in the jail. All like Muna and Muhammad, what they make, or like Jafara, what she make job just to take pictures. Every time this not stopping to continue all the times. Now before 5 minutes out, you know why the settlers they dancing in the street and the police behind the settlers. Nobody tell him because I make or just I open the radio in my car. He took me he wanted my name and he put me in the soldier they coming and they everyone he want to hit me and he beginning to want to fight. I don't want to fight. I sick. I don't want to fight. He want to give me 5,000 shekel to pay because they have law. I can't open the radio.
Okay. I'm adding to all of the stuff to everything that you mentioned right now. Of course, that the police raided the neighborhood in the last 2 weeks, shooting כדורי ספוג, sponge-tipped bullets, and a 16-year-old girl was shot from the police.
Jana Kiswani. Jana
Yeah.
Kiswani.
Yeah, Jana. So obviously this is also a part of life in the neighborhood, and I have to say I don't have words. I don't know what to say in to hear something like this. So I don't know. You're strong people, and
I hope, inshallah, I hope everyone he want to be safe. He want to love this life. To push us to continue to speaking about to finish the occupation. For I don't have any problem with the Jew. My problem with the occupation. The Jew they was before, and I living with the Jew, and I have many friends Jew, and in the future they want to be friend for the Jew. I have with the occupation who killing, who stealing, and he continue to make the life very hard for us.
okay. We have a question about the role of the Jerusalem police versus the IDF, the army. Who oversees the Jerusalem police? Who is in charge of the Jerusalem police? Who are the forces of the Jerusalem police that are coming into the neighborhood? Is it border police, Magav, which are like semi-military?
All. They coming all soldier, police, everyone. They coming now. Like last month when who shooting this girl, they coming another group, a new group, and only they shooting, only shooting.
Okay. I wanted to remind our audience that the Israeli police as a unit, which is the border police, which is between, we can say, between the army and the police. And as Jerusalem was annexed to Israel, the groups that are supposed to be in charge of those demonstrations are the police. But the police doesn't necessarily have the means or the ways or is equipped or knows how to deal with some situations, and the decision is to send into the Palestinian families some more severe or harsh units of the police. We also know that there is kind of a water, מה המילה למכתזית, סלח? יודע אותה באנגלית? המכתזית, איך אומרים אותה? המכתזית, של המים.
זה water,
We're looking for the word in English. As in Hebrew, I know it, but okay. So it's a device that was actually made by an Israeli kibbutz to shoot water at a very high volume to the protesters. This is used in some demonstrations in Jerusalem, but the ones in Sheikh Jarrah actually they use kind of filthy water. We call it the skunk. So the whole area smells from that power washer or water cannon. Thank you for writing to me in
3 weeks,
skunk water cannon.
maybe this 3 weeks, this maybe 3 weeks, 1 month.
Yeah,
This,
exactly.
yeah.
Okay, we have a question, Saleh, about international media. So it says international media has been somewhat more supportive of Palestinian human rights in the past month, and there has been pro-Palestinian demonstrations internationally in many cities in the world. How do Palestinians feel about this shift? Has it affected them at all? People know about it. What do they think?
The thinking is very nice to working with us, this friend, and they want to continue to push us to be together, inshallah, in the future.
Agreed. Sarah, we have a question about the Jordanians and UNRWA. They said that since Jordanians and UNRWA, they built the homes in which the Palestinian families live in Sheikh Jarrah, what role are they playing, or are they allowed to now, or what should they do? What do the Jordanians should do, maybe what the UN should do?
All these times, all these years before, the UNRWA no coming, no speaking before. Just before 2 months, they beginning to coming to my neighborhood. They sitting with us and they give us all the papers about 1953, 1956. And the same thing in the Jordanian. The Jordanian, they give us all the papers. But the big problem, the Israel law in the court, they don't took these papers.
Why not?
Because they have Israel occupation, they have just Israel law.
That's the story. Yeah.
I don't believe in the Israel court. This is the first thing. The second thing, I think what I see all these times, the apartheid, what they make, just apartheid. This is what I feel. This is what I see in my eyes. But I don't working with the police. I don't working with the soldier. I working with mafia. This is what I feel.
Salah, thank you very much for joining us and answering the questions. We'll release you and say goodbye.
Well, my brother, thank you. And I hope, inshallah, you coming my home to drink coffee with us, and inshallah, the future for us.
Definitely. Salah, I see you tomorrow.
Inshallah, soon, inshallah.
See you tomorrow. Thank you very much for joining us today.
See you, my brother. Bye.
Thank you. Okay. Folks, I want to just answer two more questions that we had here about the struggle itself and about the movement. And I wanted to let Salah go. I know that he had a long day, and I appreciate the fact that he was able to give us half hour of his time. Salah is all around. I mean, he goes to many Zoom talks, and this happens. I mean, that's in a way a normal day for him. There's a question that we're asked here about the solidarity movement that's growing. Do we have an idea of how many Jews or Jewish Israelis support the end of the occupation? This is a harsh question to answer, but still I'll try to give an understanding. And first, I think we need to explain which occupation or what are the borders of the occupation. Because we have a pretty big group in Israel that call for a two-state solution. And when we're asking polls, how many or what's the percentage of the Jewish Israelis or Israelis or not Jews as well, do they support the existence of a two-state solution? Do they support Palestine by Israel? For the last 20 years, we had a majority for people to support that. Over 50% of the population said they do support a Palestinian state, which means they would want to see an end of the occupation. Having said that, how exactly would it work? Does an end of the occupation and the future Palestinian state means that Israel would back from the settlements? Which, if you add that question to the equation, I think that you're getting different answers. Or if you ask Israelis, are you ready to take part in doing any non-violent act in order to stop the occupation and to lead us into a better future, which is also something that will be problematic and we'll get different answers. And we need to remember that when we're asked, or when we ask Israelis, do you support the two-state solution? And over 50% of the people would say yes. The next question in the poll is, do you believe that it will happen? And then the majority of the people say no, we support it, but we don't believe that it would happen. We need to remember those things. And we need to remember that for many Israelis or Israeli Jews, when they're hearing the sentence, from the river to the sea, Palestine would be free, they're thinking all of a sudden, wait, what does it mean about Israel? What does it mean about Zionism and about our existence? And this is something frightening for them. And if we're already explaining the Jewish-Israeli side in this story, we need to remember that the whole issue of the Israeli courts is also a triggered conversation in Israel. Because when we're talking about the Israeli Supreme Court, we have a high percentage of Israelis from the right wing that see, or from the radical right wing, that see the court as an enemy of the state, that believe in deep state theories and talk about how the Supreme Court is wrong, how Supreme Court pushes for civil rights in Israel when the elected government wouldn't do that. And usually it's the left wing in Israel that supports the Supreme Court. That doesn't mean the Supreme Court is leftist. That just means that this is the way that the political talk in Israel is made. So when we have a jurisdiction of the Supreme Court that is claiming that the houses are, I mean, they have to interpret the law. And the law says that if a Jew claimed back their property pre-1948, they can do that. So once you bring that to the equation, you talk to Israelis that are, let's say, Zionist left, all right, they vote for labor or whatever, they'll tell you, you know, if the Israeli court decided what it decided, then that for us is the bottom line, and we shouldn't argue with that, and we shouldn't go to Sheikh Jarrah and demonstrate. What we need to ask, of course, is a deeper question, and that is, what does it mean that the law was made in such a way? And if the law is not right, then what can we do? And I already tried to answer that before. I'll say a few more things on that. The first thing, obviously, is to make the Israeli government stop the evictions. And we're looking into a change in the Israeli government on Sunday. And hopefully, if nothing crazy would happen, we will have a new government in about 72 hours. It's still a right-wing government, but they do have centralists. They do have people on the left wing. Meretz would be a member in that party. Mossi Raz from Meretz, he's number 6, yeah? In Meretz in the current Knesset. He usually joins Sheikh Jarrah demonstrations. We see him there every week. That doesn't mean that Meretz has so much power in the government, but obviously it's better than the current situation. So that could be one thing. We also know that there is a way to change the law. I mean, if the Israeli Knesset would want to legislate a new law or to abolish the law from 1970 that allows Jews to restore their possession, then that could change it. But more than anything, as I said before, we're talking about international pressure. We know that if it's coming especially from America and Europe, then it makes the Israeli government look at it different. We know the demonstrations have a part in that, but also we need other things as well. Okay, I'm looking at, there's a question about where would the Palestinians go if they're evicted? The answer is to the street. There is no compensation system. If the Israeli law decided that they are not the owners and there's another owner, then that's it. That's the end of the story for them. And that actually sparked some demonstration in 2009 when Palestinian family was evicted, but they decided that they were gonna live in the street outside of their home as a part of demonstrations. And that, of course, brought many people into that. Let me see if I can find any more questions or we will wrap up. Okay, I think we will, okay, I see a question here and I'll try to answer that. The question is, in the US, people who are supportive of Palestine, including Sheikh Jarrah, are often accused of being anti-Semitic. What suggestion do you have for responding to this? It's a good question, and I'll try to answer that. First of all, Israeli peace activists, Israeli Jewish peace activists are, you know, they are asked the same question or accused of the same thing. And we need to understand that criticism towards Israel is not necessarily anti-Semitism. And we need to be specific on those things. Now, back in the day, Natan Sharansky, that was the CEO of the Jewish Agency, he mentioned kind of a test that you can do. He called it the test of the 3 Ds. Yeah, he called it demonization, delegitimization, and double standards. That's what he said, and I'll try to quote as much as I can. He said, when you're criticizing Israel, right, it could be anti-Semitism if it demonizes Israel. If you'll say, oh, Israel is shooting babies in the streets for no reason, that's demonization. If you have double standards, right? If you're saying I accuse Israel, but everything else in the world is okay, and I wouldn't accuse that, and I wouldn't support for any struggle of national movement, but only Israel is the one that is wrong, and also wouldn't blame, let's say, Palestinian organizations when they're wrong as well. That could be double standards. And the last one, standards and okay. So let's take those 2 as a beginning. If you have criticism about Israel, but you're not denouncing Israel's right to existence, let's say, if you say, okay, we understand that there is a national movement here that wanted to have a homeland for the Jewish people, and we also understand that there's a Palestinian national movement that want to do the same, so we can choose not just one side, we can choose the 2 sides. We can say, we want those 2 nations to live side by side. We want those peoples to have a home, as the UN decided in 1947 in the split of the land of Palestine. We want them to have an opportunity for a shared life. To do so, we need to bring more peace into the region. And to do so, we don't want to see eviction of families in such a one-sided law. So to support that, support Sheikh Jarrah, you're supporting future life here. Future life means that both Israelis and Palestinians will live. Because if the struggle continues, or if the fighting continues and the conflict just is escalated, then this will not bring peace to the Palestinians, obviously, but it will not bring peace to the Israeli Jews. And you need to remember that. In the last talk that we had, Aziz Abu Sara, one of the board members of Combatants for Peace, he mentioned that he likes to quote, specifically as he's a Palestinian, he likes to quote Israeli Jewish journalists and their views and how they see things as his response for anti-Semitism. I hope this answers some of that. Now, I would like us to wrap up, and I would like to turn it over to Ben. Is he with us still? If so, yeah, okay.
That's great. Listen, Shai, my name is Ben Linder. I am a board member of American Friends of Combatants for Peace. And on behalf of everyone in this room, I want to commend you, Shai, for your extreme knowledge, extremely deep and subtle interpretation of what's going on. I know that you're in Sheikh Jarrah every week on the ground. I also want to thank Salah Diab, our Palestinian speaker. And I want to thank all of you for attending. I want to thank all of you for giving of your time to the effort that these guys, our combatants, do on the ground every day. And I also want to ask for your support. American Friends of Combatants for Peace is a 501(c)(3) charitable organization here in the United States. And we raise funds to be able to carry on these activities in Israel and Palestine. We send our funds directly to the combatants to fund both the Israeli organization and the Palestinian side of the organization. And every donation you make is going to help this fight go on. It's going to help these combatants. A couple of weeks ago, 8 of our combatants were arrested in a demonstration in Sheikh Jarrah, and our organization bailed them out. It's very important work, and we really commend you. We'll put in the chat the link, or the link is already in the chat for donations. And I really urge you to think about supporting us on a monthly basis. Just really set it up in an automatic way so that you know that every month you're supporting this organization. Shai, thank you so much for your time and energy and effort and just clarity in bringing this issue out. And thanks everyone else. Please follow us on Facebook. We're on every social media platform, and we'll see you at the next event.
Thank you very much. Bye.